What is the true cost of immigration? Well, that's a question people have been arguing about for centuries, probably since the very first person looked at their neighbor and said, "Hey, wait a minute, where are you from?" For most of human history, moving around was pretty chill. It was just people wandering into the next forest over, saying hi to the new neighbors. Except there weren't any neighbors since there just wasn't enough humans around. Then nation-states showed up in the 17th century and they made a big fancy word for it. Now your wandering is called immigration. It got wild in the 19th century. After they got rid of slavery, European powers needed a new way to get cheap labor, so they invented indentured servitude. This was basically slavery with a contract, so basically like modern-day jobs. Millions of people, mostly from India and China, were shipped off to plantations in the Americas. Then in the US, huge waves of Irish and German immigrants showed up, and the people already there, the nativists, said, "Hold on, too many Catholics, too much change." This kind of panic led to truly bonkers policies. In 1924, the US decided to pick who got in based on who was here way back in 1890, which basically meant, "Welcome, Western Europeans! Everybody else, thanks for playing." Canada did something similar by making Chinese immigrants pay a hefty head tax, and Australia had a full-on White Australia policy. It was racism all around. Fast forward through 2 world wars, and suddenly a lot of countries realized maybe judging people by their race isn't the best look, and started focusing on things like family and job skills instead. This is where the US stopped innovating on immigration, but Canada got super serious and invented this famous points system to only let in the smart, skilled people they wanted. It was sort of like a video game. Canada, the Nintendo of immigration. But all this history brings us back to today, and the biggest argument of all, the money. Is immigration a massive financial burden or a huge economic boost? So when you add up all the centuries of forced movement, restrictive laws, and complicated money trails, is the true cost of immigration a massive bill, or is it just the price of a dynamic, growing economy? But first, a word from our economical overlord. Email is completely useless now. Between companies just sending ads disguised as newsletter and scammers somehow getting around spam filters, email is dead. If it wasn't for every website requiring you to sign up with your email before you can do anything on the site, I wouldn't even have an email address anymore. Luckily, my friend created a new email service that might just fix all these issues. That email is port87.com. This is a game changer that you've been waiting for. Port87 lets you create a unique email address for anything. Seriously, signing up for that new online store, generate a quick, unique address. Downloading an ebook, another unique address. Signing up for that sketchy website to download Linux ISOs, unique address. Here's the best part. All those emails get automatically sorted and organized. Port87's unique addresses allow you to organize everything. You can make sure every email goes to your main inbox known as the ag box, or delete the address and force every email into a black hole. Port87 now supports custom domains. You can have all your emails sent to your own custom domain, that part of the email address after the @ symbol, and you can have it automatically sorted by Port87. Port87 has completely changed how I manage my online life. It's simple, it's secure, and it gives me back the control of my inbox. If you're ready to finally end the email chaos, you have to try it. Click the link in the description or go to port87.com/powerofmoney to get started and take back control of your inbox. Now, back to our story. Forced labor and early immigration. To answer the question of how much immigration costs, we gotta rewind way past the First World War, back to the 1800s. When the world finally decided that chattel slavery was a bad look, plantation owners had a big problem. Who was going to do all the backbreaking work on their sugar and cotton farms? The plantation owners? Never! They needed a workaround, and boy did they find one. They cooked up something called indentured servitude. This was essentially a buy now, pay later with your whole life deal. You'd sign a paper agreeing to work for years in a new colony like the British Caribbean or Mauritius for a tiny salary and a promise of a better life. Millions of people, mostly from India and China, fell for this. It was so brutal and exploitative that historians just call it a genuine slave trade in disguise. Meanwhile, a massive, unprecedented wave of people started showing up in North America. Millions from Ireland, Germany, and later on huge numbers from Southern and Eastern Europe, all chasing that sweet, sweet American dream. And what did the people already there, the nativists, do? They totally freaked out. It was like a massive neighborhood block party where the host tried to lock the doors, which you can't do because there are no doors because the whole block is partying. That's how a block party works. This panic was so strong that countries started closing up shop and getting seriously restrictive. Canada, for example, made Chinese immigrants pay a massive head tax, a giant entrance fee just to walk in the door. Australia straight up invented the White Australian policy, but the king of restriction was the US. In 1924, they passed a law so complicated it basically said, "We like the people who came here a long time ago, and we do not like the people who are coming now." They used the population numbers from 1890 like some weird immigration time machine to decide who was good and who was bad. It wasn't even a hot tub time machine, just a racist time machine. So after centuries of people being moved around by force or signing contracts that were basically a scam and then being told they weren't white enough to stay, how do we end up with the modern idea that immigration is just about job skills and economics? Post-war. The world learned a hard lesson after the two biggest wars in history. It turns out having official government policies that say, "We hate you because of where your grandparents were born," isn't a great look. So countries realized they had to ditch the old racist-y laws like the US national origins quotas and the White Australia stuff. The new mission became, who can help us make money? Family reunification was another huge reason for immigration, which is basically the idea that if your sister is already here, you should probably be allowed to join her. But the real game changer was the focus on skills. Canada basically reinvented an immigration spreadsheet. In 1967, they introduced the famous point system. Instead of asking if you were the right flavor of European, they asked, "How old are you? Do you speak English or French? What's your education? What kind of job skills do you have?" And you would get points depending on how you answered, like some weird immigration game show. If you hit the magic number of points, congrats, you're in! It was purely economic, and it became the model for a lot of countries. At the same time, the world was still a chaotic mess. The Cold War and conflicts like the Vietnam War created massive refugee crises. Suddenly, immigration wasn't just about economic migrants looking for a better job, it was about people running for their lives. The world sometimes, very reluctantly, had to figure out how to handle people escaping persecution, like the millions of Indo-Chinese refugees who fled their homelands. So this complex mix of economic selection, are you smart enough to get the points, and the humanitarian crisis is what created this modern immigration system. They were slapped together, along with family reunification, to create the Frankenstein monster of an immigration policy we have in many countries today. And that finally brings us to the biggest fight of all, the money. We know history is messy, but what does this all cost today? When you add up the centuries of forced movement, restrictive laws, and complicated money trails, is the true cost of immigration a massive bill, or is it just the price of a dynamic, growing economy? By dynamic, we mean tacos. Please think of the taco stands before you get all judgy. The cost of immigrants. This is where things get spicy. You've got the people shouting they're a massive bill and the people shouting they're an economic boost. Who's right? It turns out both are kind of right, but in a very weird way because the whole system is totally messed up. The budget black hole and the full wallet. Let's talk about taxes and public services. Here is the great fiscal disconnect of immigration. The federal government usually gets a huge net fiscal benefit from immigrants. Why? Because immigrants pay a ton of federal income and payroll taxes that fund big ticket programs like Social Security and Medicare. Immigrant-led households pay almost $525 billion a year in taxes. Heck, the undocumented immigrants alone pay close to $90 billion in taxes, often using a fake or borrowed Social Security number, which means they're paying into the system but are largely blocked from getting any of the benefits. Because the federal government will always look away when you want to give them money, but they get all in your business when you want to ask for some of that money back. Undocumented immigrants don't want any government all up in their business. The government accountants who look at all this stuff, like the National Academy of Sciences, say the average lifetime fiscal impact of immigrants is positive. In fact, the recent surge in immigration is projected to shrink the federal deficit by boosting the GDP by $7 trillion over the next decade. That's a lot of tacos! But if the feds are making out like bandits, who's paying the bill? Local and state governments. Immigrants can be a net cost to your local, city, or state. The biggest reason? Public education for the kids. That's expensive. But nobody wants a bunch of uneducated people running around. Plus, there are local costs for things like emergency medical services. The core problem is a structural mess. The tax money flows mostly to the federal treasury, but the biggest service costs are stuck on the local school boards and city councils. It's not an immigration problem, it's a who pays for what government problem. The zero-sum myth. Now for the big fear that immigrants are stealing our gerbs. Turns out the idea that the number of jobs is fixed is what economists call the zero-sum myth. It's fake. Immigrants aren't just workers, they're also consumers and entrepreneurs who create new jobs for everyone else. In fact, immigrants are a massive engine for growth. Since 2000, they have accounted for nearly 3/4 of all growth in the prime age labor force. The native-born population is aging out, and nobody wants to see Granny working until she dies. So without immigrants, the economy just starts to seize up. They are also innovation superstars. They start businesses at higher rates than US-born people, and they've been involved in the development of 30% of patents in strategic industries. Think of all that taco innovation. But what about the wages of the native-born worker? The rigorous research, the stuff that looks long-term, finds that the average effect of immigration on the wages of US-born workers are essentially zero. Why? Because of complementarity. Immigrants tend to fill jobs at the very high skill or very low skill end of the spectrum. When a low skilled immigrant takes a manual job, it actually allows the native born worker to specialize in a more complex, better paying role, which raises their productivity. Very high skilled jobs always demand more workers with those skills. No amount of immigration will cause those jobs to disappear. So the fiscal cost is a complex accounting problem, and the economic cost is actually a massive profit engine. But there's one more cost people talk about, the social one. Does immigration create a massive cultural clash, or does it just make society more interesting? To help answer that question, let's look at a specific case. Kilmar Abrego Garcia. On March 15th, 2025, Kilmar Abrego Garcia disappeared. He was deported to the concentration camp called Echoplex in El Salvador. Abrego Garcia had never been charged or convicted of a crime. He has never been a member of any gang, regardless of what the United States government claims. He was a father to a special needs child and a productive member of the community. He was deported anyway. DHS grabbed him after he picked up his son from his grandmother's house. The DHS agent threatened to turn his son over to Child Protective Services unless Abrego Garcia's wife immediately picked him up. He was deported to El Salvador, a place where a judge said he could not be sent due to credible threats to his life. His wife noticed Abrego Garcia in some video of the prisoners in Echoplex. Had she not seen that video, she may never have known what happened to Abrego Garcia. Fortunately, Abrego Garcia was returned to the United States after an uproar from his community. The federal government of the United States acted in a wildly illegal way in an effort to remove Abrego Garcia and keep him out of the country. After Abrego Garcia returned to the U.S., Tennessee suddenly decided Abrego Garcia had committed a crime in that state. He was indicted and jailed in Tennessee pending trial. However, he was released pending trial with explicit orders from the judge that Abrego Garcia could not be deported. He was detained by ICE again and is scheduled to be deported. As this script is being written, Abrego Garcia has not yet been deported, but the Trump administration says they have plans to deport him to Liberia, a place that Abrego Garcia has no connection to and has nothing to do with this case. I would say that deporting migrants, even illegal migrants, is like shooting yourself in the foot, but it's more like placing your right foot over your left foot, carefully aiming, then shooting both feet at the same time, where the left foot is a contributing member of the community and the right foot is all the expenses of the process of deporting someone. The careful aim is, I don't know. This analogy is breaking down, so let's just call it racism. If you think you're safe because you are a U.S. citizen, think again. In a recent report, immigration agents were found to have detained 170 U.S. citizens, some for days and without access to lawyers. U.S. citizens!
ICE, open up!